Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Well, hello, my constant listeners, and hello to my semi-constant listeners, and a special hello to my brand new listeners. Thank you for coming back to Shaman's Way and to Kriket's mental meanderings on shamanism. Thank you for your incredibly valuable and precious time. It means a lot to me that we get to spend time together and I get to share some of my meanderings. As I approach numbers of podcasts that I never suspected to hit, I wanted very much to share with you some of my reflections. What are some of the things that I find the most fascinating about shamanism? Now, I know my constant listeners are going to laugh, and probably even some of my semi-constant listeners, because I know you guys are going to say, oh, it has to be the medicine wheel. And you would be absolutely right, the medicine wheel. I know I've discussed it in many different podcasts, either singularly or throughout some of the words. So I'm not going to move very much into talking about what I love about the medicine wheel for the very simple reason that I have discussed it lots. I think one of the points that I don't visit very often, so I would like to visit here, is the absolute multiple layers and the depth of the wheel. We talk about the wheel, I talk about the wheel in a matter of a circle with directions and blah, blah, blah. I think one of the points that I don't make often enough is the absolute depth of the underworlds and the absolute heights of the upper world and the all-encompassment that the wheel puts together. Remember, at the center of the wheel is chaos. At the center is constant movement. At the center is, the void, that number 0. What does the center mean? What does the void mean? And I think that there are times when I talk more about the specificity of one or the other, but I don't necessarily talk about the incredible depths and the many multiple layers of understandings, information, and interrelationship between this world and that world, between this plane and that plane. I wanted to touch on that briefly because like I said, I think it doesn't always get enough attention from my perspective. So then the other part, what else, absolutely interests me is the interrelationship. And not just relationship, but the interrelationship between what I think is all worlds, all beings. And the interrelationship, if I think about some of the words that I could use interchangeably, it would be kin or kindred or kinship. I love the word kin. I love the power animals in my language turning into spirit kin because they are kin. There is that interrelationship. There is that interdependence. I think one of the valuable parts of the interdependence between yourself and the spirits is that it is the antithesis of I'd say more the first world or the contemplation of consciousness and the contemplation of independence. We seem to have a mindset that has a proponent of strong independence. I think the relationship that we have with the spirit world, with our spirit kin, that interrelationship helps us to balance that sense of independence. As independent as I am in this 3D reality I call my life, My relationship to the world is one of independence. When I travel, when I stand in the place of spirit, when I stand consciously within that place of spirit, it is that interdependence that I find the most invaluable for me. That interdependence comes in my life. Well, I couldn't really shut it off even if I wanted to. How many times have you had that sensation at the back of your back, at the back of your head, or that inner knowing, or that inner understanding, so on and so forth? You understand where I'm getting. That's a part of the interdependence, from my perspective anyway. It's the part of the interdependence between yourself and the others, the other side, that place, those other beings that are not other and yet one. It's the paradox of all aspects of spirituality. It is that relationship of the many to the absolute singularity of self. That is something that absolutely fascinates me, is interrelationship. So the interrelationship we have with our spirit kin, the interrelationship we have, the way in which, the meaning of interrelationship is the way in which two or more things are related, or are related to one another, to others, or to others. So there's that, there's that kinship, that interdependence, the relationship of one to many others, and, the sum of the parts. Blah, 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 something about the whole. Interrelationship. It's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to develop a relationship with another human being and with spirits. Sometimes just for that one moment, for that one experience, and all the relationships can last many years, if not a lifetime, if not many lifetimes. I know that there are many of you listening who have a relationship to a past life, or an understanding of a past life, or acceptance that reincarnation is a part of your reality. And for others that are listening, that may not be part of your version of reality. And I don't think that really has an impact on the interrelationship. But I do know that for those who have thought, I've been with this being before, I've been with this person before, I've traveled with this spirit before, I know this animal, blah, 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 blah. There is that relationship between now, and this is the next part that I think is absolutely fascinating. So we have interrelationship, but now we're going to burgeon into perception. So you have this relationship that may be just this lifetime, because this lifetime is all you get. Could be this relationship that goes back eons and stretches into the future as much as it stretches into the past. There are those different types of relationships. The interrelationship of the now with the past and with the future, stepping into healing work. You're in that merge between all time. You're present in the place of the spiritual extraction, the spiritual healing. You're standing in the place of behind, because you're standing in the place of the past, where that particular wounding or that pulled muscle first began. And you're standing in the place of future with your intention for healing, whatever that healing looks like. So this is that interrelationship, and it very beautifully blends with perceptions. Perceptions are very important to me. It's one of the most intriguing aspects of the shamanic reality. There are many types of healing work. There are different ways of perceiving the physical body, the mental body, all of those things. And those things I've talked about. And I know that I have done a particular podcast on perception, but it still is one of the most intriguing parts of reality. What is it about this interrelationship? What is it about this perception? I stopped my tangent because I didn't know where it was going to end, and I thought, Kriket, bring it back together. You only have your listeners for so long. So I'm not tripping out. I'm getting back to the bones, what I'm talking about. Perception. Why do I keep doing it? I keep doing it. I keep spending all this time, and I keep sharing all of my, my time and some of my information, some of my knowledge with you guys, because I love to see the shift. I love to stand in that place of center, looking back and looking forward. And perception is going to be so channeled and challenged, both, in your experiences, because this clouds your perception as much as it gives clarity to perception. My experience also experiences expectation. So what is my expectation with respect to experience? Is my expectation going to be different than your expectation and vice versa? Absolutely, it's going to be. We may have a similar structural expectation, but your perception of reality and my perception of reality are going to be two very different things. When we travel in the spirit world, when we travel in the 3D reality, we are continually perceiving and picking up little bits and pieces. So if you walk into a spiritual reality, if you walk into a spiritual place, do we focus on one thing? Are we trained to focus on many different things? Widening perceptions, widening peripheral vision, widening that psychic intuition, that clairvoyance, that clairsentience, the clairaudience, the different clairs. I think we all have access to the clairs. I think that we may be born with a greater ability to access than some. I think that may be one reason why someone is XYZ at something or has this particular reality of perception down pat, where you may wish for that reality or that perception to be part of your experience, but it's just not part of your experience. So your experience, the expectation, and the conditioning all challenge and through your perception. How do we perceive illness? Perception, one of the reasons why perception was important to me was because it blends into another aspect of shamanism that I find just never-ending, blow-my-mind awesomeness, is mystery. From the interrelationship between all things to the perception of that I am the perceiver is the perceived. So as the world I am looking at the world is looking back at me. I gaze into the eyes of spirit, the eyes of spirit gaze back into me. There is that perpetual knowledge of the observer and the observed. In that reality of that perceiver and the perceived is again going to move through experience. I have experience with seeing how a body is physically by seeing red spots. For me, that's my perception. It's my experience. Therefore, it's my conditioning. And I have an expectation that I may see red spots if you have an illness. That's my perception. But if I didn't have a relationship between my healing spirits and how they're going to show me things, that's highly unlikely that I wouldn't have the perception of the spots, or that be the expectation of how I can ascertain where something is wrong in the body. And that's when mystery comes in, because now I have the ability to perceive these things, but now I don't have to, but my part of my conditioning, part of my training, part of my honing my skills is to be able to track that and get an intuitive sense of what might be going on. And it may or may not be affirmed by the person I'm speaking to, or it may or may not be affirmed by the experience within the spirit world, or it may or may not even be, proven or given back to me in the real world, in this reality. So the mystery. How do you determine what that mystery is? How do you determine what could be a pattern, or what could be an event, what could be a language, whatever that is? That's juicy. That's juicy. Like that's like, woo, brain massively awesomeness coming at you. Mystery, right? So, how do we all perceive mystery? How do we perceive stories? That's a good way of figuring out how you perceive mystery. Can you accept far offlandish tales? Most of us are probably going, yeah, I can. And most of us could. So that's an easy one. But what about if that mystery or that fairy tale or that story of the hero's journey or the impoverished child or the stone child or the crone without fire comes to you in a real life story? Are you going to buy that story? Are you going to have as much compassion for that story as you would to have compassion for something that is removed from you? So something that comes up in a story, something that comes up in a movie, crying so deeply over a movie, some people, and yet life doesn't make them, they don't see life as intently or as impactfully as that which they see before them. So that removal of relationship to the present, removal of the relationship to the now. So perception and mystery. Here we have again, what is it that makes us see things the way that we see things? What gives us the ability to figure out how that mystery plays into self? So these are some of the things that really keep me going. It really helps to make the observer in me have more tools, the observer in me to be more awake and more alert. Not only in the physical world reality of the observer, I challenge you when you go into a room, look around you and walk out of the room and come back and see if you could remember how many things can you remember that were on the walls or on the floors. I have a story for this. Of course I do, right? Because I'm a storyteller. Anyway, there was this show in Alberta, in Edmonton, called Popcorn Playhouse. And one of the parts of the kids' show was they would show this picture and then they'd close it and then they'd ask certain kids what they saw. And it really, it was probably, I may have been 5 or 6 at the time. And it really altered how I looked at things, because it told me as a little child, this game, that it would be better for me, I would have more fun if I observed things. So one of my favorite things, I'm a movie buff, I love my movies. I love set design, absolutely love set design, because again, it's part of the perception. It's part of creating that story. It's part of bringing us into the relationship. So I ask you, when you're in a spiritual place, or if you're journeying or you're using a drum or a rattle or a voice or a didge or anything that you use when you're sitting in ceremony in order to see into another space, another place, another time, what do you perceive? How many of your senses are you perceiving with? Do you perceive solely with the eyes? Do you perceive with the ears? Do you perceive smell? Do you perceive taste? What do you perceive? Challenge yourself to perceive more. Challenge yourself to understand the interrelationship between what you see and what you've missed. What have you missed all of those times you've gone to that certain place, that certain house, that certain field, in your dreams, in your daydreams, in your journeys? I don't care. Is there something that you've missed? And if you've missed something, what's the mystery in what you've missed? What is it that either you've seen it so many times you really don't care? Or have you never seen it before because you've never challenged yourself to remember 14 things about that room? Or what was that picture? What was in that picture? How many times does something change? The more alert you are, the more aware you are, the more awake you are, the deeper the interrelationship between this world and now, between now and the back place and the forward place, between now and the underworld and the upper world, between the now and, you get what I mean? That's what I think having perception is the ability to have many senses running at the same time, still being able to focus within the presence of self, or present now. And I know that there are lots of my constant listeners, my semi-constant listeners, and you may even be one of them, my new listener, who has special training to be aware or to be observant, whether that training is in security, whether that training is in military, whether that training is in law enforcement, whatever that may be, there's another form of perception. Whatever you do in your day job is another form of perception, honed skill. Can you use a relationship between your honed skill in this world and use it as a honed skill in the spirit world? Can you take something in the spirit world and hone it in the physical world to help you create a relationship between this world and that world, that space that is as thin as, a maple leaf? How can you perceive that? How can you bring this world forward and make the unconscious conscious, and then bring the consciousness back to the unconscious to inform the unconscious again, and then to swoosh it around, and then again the unconscious creates conscious. So the knowledge coming in, swoosh, 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 get it in all four aspects of self. You knew I was going to go into the four aspects of self. The mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. All of those aspects of self also pertain to all of the aspects of the outside world. Because the outside world, every single person has that. Every single inanimate object, in my view, also has that intellectual, that spiritual, that physical, and perhaps mental, perhaps some of this, perhaps some of that. Maybe not all four aspects, but perhaps aspects of the human state, or the human state is personified or anthropomorphized into something inanimate. It's interesting. So here we are. These are some of the things that keep me going. And they seem pretty intellectual. And when I look back at it, when I think about the words that I've spoken, it seems pretty intellectual. However, it is also the pathway between what I perceive and what brings my heart great joy. It brings my heart great joy to be aware. It brings my heart great joy to embody, enfold, and embrace the four aspects of self and attempt to be aware of those aspects, hopefully simultaneously. Not always, but hopefully simultaneously. It is my hope in my relationship to spirits that when I stand in sacred time and sacred space and sacred place, that I can take my ego, put it aside, and allow myself to be a vessel for the holy sacred work. My perception of relationship, my perception of interrelationship, interdependence, my relationship to my interdependence with mystery, my interdependence on the void, my interdependence on the new moon, on that void pregnant with potential. Do you have that interdependence too? Do you long to know the secrets of the mystery? Which we can never know them all, obviously, because it's a mystery. Right? What are our perceptions? How you perceive the world and how I perceive the world are two entirely different matters. I've already talked about that. But even when we have the perceptions of journeys, What can you bring back and share with not only yourself, but what if you can share with other people some of the things that come back from the journeys? What are their perceptions going to be based on their experience, based on their conditioning, based on their expectations? What is their expectation of reality? I tell you, that's an interesting one. We've all played with people in our life with some of the perceptions that we have. Maybe not. Maybe that's not where you stand in your journey yet. Maybe challenging other people's perceptions of reality is not your journey or your journey yet, and honor where you are. But for those of us who do like to challenge other people's perception of reality, I must admit it's kind of fun. And I also must admit, after this many years, it can get a little tiring of the expectation that others have. The expectation that my perceptions are, used for people would like to know the future, yet my expectation, my experience is, if you can handle now, I really don't care about your future. This is what goes on right now. We're in the muck and the mire of the present now. How can we detach from the present now and the illusions of the present now in order to pierce through the veil of pierce through the veil of clouds and gain a deeper clarity and a deeper sense of perception? By standing in the present now, by fully embracing the present now, by dipping underneath the conscious now, into the unconscious now, into the superconscious now. When I dive deep into my perceptions, I'll give you an example. If I'm feeling super, super sad, I try not to hold on to that sadness. What I envision is I envision myself curled up and just falling through space and totally safe, and darkness, the hands of darkness, one hand after another hand, brings me down, brings me down, brings me down, brings me down to the depth of my sadness, so I can experience my sadness in its totality, or what I experience as its totality, and allow it to release. And then the hands of darkness pass me from one hand to another hand, to another hand, to another hand, until I come to the present now, to this place of lightness and consciousness. That's how I move through the perceptions, not always gracefully. Good heavens, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I get tripped up too, but this has been the most effective use of my perceptions of my relationship between my emotions, my relationship between my present time, my relationship to my kin, my interdependence, and my independence. All of those things help to build a pattern and a path for me to embrace who I am. Moving through the medicine wheel, moving through all of those places on the medicine wheel, going through the paths of wisdom, coming to a deeper understanding of self, coming deeper than the shell of the present face that holds society's view, that holds society's attention. Where is my deeper self? What is the well of my deeper self? And how can I move from that well of deeper self and dip my hand in the knowledge of myself, that knowledge of my perception, that knowledge of my void, that knowledge of my own mystery, all of my lessons. Sometimes you learn a lesson and you drop it in the well. You don't hold on to everything. But then every once in a while, whoosh, this hand comes up. So now you have a different view of perception. Now you have a different perception. So if I move into all of those pieces, and if I scoop down into the well of my unconscious self, and I pull up the mystery, if I pull up those lost gifts, if I even pull up to the measure of myself, I feel more engaged in the now and in the present. Every time we spin through, every time we move through, we gain another level of self and another level of understanding. So, what does this have to do with anything? What does this mental meandering, where did this take us? These are my reflections. These are some of the things which keep me so engaged. The journey work, fascinating. the one-on-one healing work, astounding. I love my teaching. I love doing the podcasts with you. I love sharing sacred space with you. I love sharing my knowledge. These are the things that I truly love. So what is the point of all of this? The point for me is just sharing what keeps my spirit ticking, what makes my soul grow. It is entirely admirable to want to know all the techniques and to understand all the healing methods and to understand all of the chasing, I used to call it chasing the ritual. And for many years I did the same thing. I always looked for, but how? But how? Right? How do I do this? How do I do that? So I was always looking for the but how. And as I move through the but how, I come into, right, there's deeper. Wait a minute. I can actually stop trying to acquire, sit in my acquirement, sit within my tickle trunk, my treasure chest, and know that my knowledge is exactly what I need. And what I need to do is change how I perceive what I'm doing. What I need to do is work on my relationship and the interrelationship. What I want to do is work on my interrelationship. What I want to do is continually shift my perceptions, continually take in more information and knowledge, not only by sitting still, but by digesting, by integrating, by working with what I have been given. If you are in the stage of acquiring, and that's your path, then some of my words and some of my reflections, I'm sure, hit with you. But they may also change and hit you differently 5 months from now, 5 years from now. If this even exists 5 years from now. We don't know. I encourage us all to sit within our relationships, pondering with our wide open views and perceptions, the mystery. And when we gain that bit of information, when we gain that gift, when we gain that understanding from the mystery, and we bring it into the here and the now, and we integrate it, how do we express it in the 4 aspects of self? How do we understand it? How do we feel it? How do we move with it in the body? How do we spiritually change or alter because we have changed this perception, because it moved into the mystery and then brought it into the here and the now? Integration and reflection. Reflection. We've talked about integrating a lot. Be a pool for yourself too. I know many of you write, I know many of you journal, I know many of you record your journeys. Those will become invaluable tools for you as you change and as you merge, as you already know, or you wouldn't be writing. Some of you aren't writers. That's just not your thing. Hopefully you record bits and pieces. Hopefully you encourage yourself to integrate what you've learned or what you've seen or what gifts you've been given. And how do you shift? How do you see your spirit world shifting? Since you've started this path to where you are now, how has it shifted? Has your perception gone or, oh, Yakshomaya? Where are you in that aspect of self? And how does it feel? So what's it all about? Well, if I didn't have that wonderful wonderful view of shamanism and an intense desire to learn about shamanism, I wouldn't have the mysterious core of self. I wouldn't be given the beautiful opportunity to understand the core of self. My interrelationships, my perceptions, the mystery, and the manifestation of all the aspects of self. The rest is wonderful, and the structure of shamanism, I mean structure as in the house or the igloo or the hut or whatever it is, like whatever your house looks like, whatever your structure looks like, how does that build that out is an important part of it. What are your tools? What are the things that you have to use in the real world to affect real change? Not maybe just for yourself, and maybe for the environment around you, however you want to use this information and knowledge. But don't, we can't unacknowledge or disavow or move away from that internal shift of self, that internal turning of self. That's one of the biggest gifts that this path has given to me, is the reflection of self and how the self reflects the whole, and and the whole internally ultimately reflects the self. That's a whole other topic for a whole other day. And I just want to thank you for listening. And if this has hit any clues, cues, ideas, thoughts, reflections, ahas, awesome. And if not, maybe tomorrow. And if never, sometimes we are Teflon. Everything just slides right off. And that is a good thing too. Until next time, I shall see you again. Oh, no, I shall just probably talk to you again. Okay, bye.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.